Hello and welcome to my workshop. If you've been watching my YouTube videos, you know that I've spent about the last 6 years designing, creating, and building this HO scale model railroad layout. And in doing so, I've also created 10 scenes throughout the layout. Well, this video is all about the 11th scene that we'll be creating. It's this area right here. And I'm going to show you how I was inspired to design this particular scene, how I designed it, materials that I've used to build it, and little tricks that I've learned from other model railroaders in building that scene as well. So if that all sounds like it's something that would be helpful to you, you have come to the right video. Let's get started. So the first step is to do a little bit of research. So I just went on the internet and I printed out some photographs of scenes that I want to incorporate into the scene that I'm creating on my layout. And then the next step was to determine what type of elements do I want in this scene. So I just started to make out a list. And I've listed out things like I want a walking path, I want a wooden fence, I'd like to put in a stream with flowers along the side of the stream, kind of a park bench scene, with a guy playing guitar, things like that. So I made a list of all these things out. Then I took a photograph of the scene itself. So I was able to create more of a visual planning process of where I'm going to place all these elements in the scene. And I just started to literally scratch it out on the photograph. Once that's done, now it's ready to take the scene back into the workshop. And if you have seen other videos of mine, you know that I'm a big proponent of, whenever possible, do a cutout and just take the scene back into the workshop on the cutout and work on it there. So we're in the workshop, and the first thing we're going to do is cut out of the styrofoam the pond and the creek scene. It's very messy, and so we want to do that first to get all the messy stuff out of the way before we do any other work on the scene. Once we cut it out of the styrofoam and we smooth it out with a putty knife, then we're going to seal it with some plaster cloth. The plaster cloth helps seal the styrofoam so that the liquid we're going to use to create the water effect scene doesn't leak through the board. Once it's all done, we want to let it dry for about 24 hours. And then after that 24 hours, we're ready to go over it with some a mixture of plaster to double seal it. Brushing on this plaster also gives us a texture for the bottom of the fishing pond and the bottom of the creek. So we get a very lifelike texture. We're going to get that plaster another 24 hours to dry. Once it does, then we're ready to start painting. And we're going to begin by using yellow silt, a Woodland Scenics product, to paint the banks of the creek and the pond. It's a little time consuming, as you can imagine, but this is actually one of the more relaxing phases of the modeling, I find, so it's kind of fun to do, but it does take some time. But here we see the finished product where all the banks of the creek and the pond are painted with that yellow silk, and we want to give that a good 12 to 18 hours to dry and to cure before we go on to the next step, which is painting the bottom of the pond and the creek bed. I was going to use a dark green color, but then I got to thinking about it, and if you've seen creeks and small ponds, they're usually, the bottoms are mud base. And so I've decided to use a slate gray paint, and that, when it hits the plaster, actually turns more of a mud color. So this completes the work right now that we're going to do on the creek and the pond. We don't want to add the water effect just yet because we have so much other work to do on the scene. The debris will end up in the water, and we don't want that to happen. So we're done for now. Now it's on to the next step. I wanted to share with you some of the products that I'll be using for this segment of the scene building. I'm going to be using this meadow grass from Scene Master. I really like the way it looks. You'll see why in a little bit. Also be using some Woodland Scenics coarse turf earth. Also some Mod Podge glue, of course. Another Woodland Scenics product, fine earth. I'm going to be using that around the banks of the creek and the fishing pond. In addition to that, we'll be using some static grass
from Woodland Scenics, both 4mm and 7mm sizes. But I'm not going to apply the static grass like you normally apply it. You'll see that in just a little bit. We'll also have some field grass that I'll be planting around portions of the creek and portions of the fishing pond. That's just a sampling. There's going to be probably several more types of products, but those are the ones I'm going to get started with. And you can see I've already begun putting down some of the fine earth product around the banks of the creek. So that's what I'm working on first to go around here. And again, usually as you plan out your scene, you want to try to get the messy stuff done first and work your way out of it, so to speak. And so that's why we did the cutting for the creek and the pond, and that's why I'm doing this fine earth part next, because it can be a little messy as well.
So to prepare the surface for the fine earth product, I'm just putting down some Mod Podge glue, and then I'll be sprinkling on the fine earth product onto the glue, and that seals it down. It's kind of messy. It's the consistency of fine sand, actually. So you have to sweep up quite a bit when you're done sprinkling it on. Give it about 10 hours to dry, and then seal it with a final coat of Scenic Spray cement. This is going to take about 8 to 10 hours to dry. When it's dry, then I'm ready to add the static grass around the pond and the creek line. And I'm just using Mod Podge glue and then putting this static grass on top of that. This also takes about a half hour for it to stand up, to cure a little bit, and then let it dry overnight. Once it's all installed, I like to take a brush and fluff it up a little bit. And this is how you can get more of the type of scene that you want. And of course, I'm putting the longer grass, the 7mm static grass, on the inside edge, and the shorter 4mm grass on the outside edge around the pond and the creek. After about a half hour of drying, I'll go through, after I fluffed it up, and run a shop vac over it. And again, that makes the grass stand up even a little bit taller. And then I'll go over it one more time with the brush to get the final look that I'm looking for. Like most things, you want to try to let it dry overnight, at least 12 to 18 hours, and this is what it should look like when you're done.
Well, we're in the middle of the landscaping portion of the project, and right now it's going to be time for us to determine exactly where that pathway is going to be placed on the scene. And if you remember our original plan, the pathway does run from one end of the scene to the other, and it bridges the creek in two different locations, so we need some footbridges. I've scoured the internet and I found my sample. I'm going to model my footbridges basically after this. The bigger question that comes up during all of this is, when you're making things for your layout, how do you make it to scale? I'm going to show you how, just by regular eyesight and by using this little man, I scale everything to HO scale without any fancy tools. That's coming up next. So the easiest method that you can use to ensure that everything on your layout looks to be to scale without getting into a lot of complicated calculations is this. I went to Woodland Scenics. I bought an adult male figure. We know that in real life, adult males are on average 6 feet tall. So I'm going to call this adult male figure 6 feet. And when I made the footbridge, for example, I knew the footbridge in reality shouldn't be wider than 4 feet. So how did I figure all that out? Didn't do a lot of serious calculations. I laid my little man next to the footbridge and eyeballed it. And I think it turned out pretty well. In fact, I've used that technique a lot throughout my entire layout. So if you get a chance to look at some of the scenes that I built, you can tell me what you think, but I think they're pretty darn close. Well, I've figured out and I've plotted where the path is going to be, and I've started building it actually. So the path is going to start down here. There'll be like a log going over the creek, over to this scene. This is where the guitar player will be. Over one of the footbridges, over another small footbridge. That will lead over to a camping scene here. And the pathway around this way will lead to a fishing scene. And then off to the end. So after I used the Woodland Scenics blended turf on the path, I wanted to give it a little bit more of a path color, and so I'm putting on this Woodland Scenics product again. It's a light brown earth, and it's a powdery substance that you have to apply with a brush. And I'm just taking little bits of it and brushing it right on the path over the blended turf. And it gives it a little bit more of a real pathway look, I think, to it. And we're just going to spread it around like that. Well, we're almost done with the landscaping portion of this part of the project, and I want to share with you quickly some of the products that I've used to do the landscaping, how I've used them, and then also give you a quick overview of what the project looks like now before we start phase 2. So let's take a quick look at where we're at. So I have decided to name the scene Willoughby, and I already made the sign for it. It's right here, and in order for you to understand this, you have to be a fan of the Twilight Zone. So there's your homework assignment. You already know that I use the static grass, both 7mm and 4mm lengths, and I applied it by hand to outline both the path and the creek and the pond and things like that. And it was very time consuming, but I like the way it turned out. Other parts of the terrain, for example, here is where I'm going to be placing the figurines with the kids playing baseball in a field. And that needed to look a little bit different than, say, the terrain or that you would typically see around a farmhouse. And so all I did to get this coloring was I mixed the green blended turf and the earth tone blended turf together, and that gave me that color. And then I sprinkled on a little bit of dark green, throwing some patches, and that turned out fairly well. For the gravel section, I actually used real gravel. This is finely sifted gravel that I glued down. And this is where the lighted truck is going to go and the young man playing basketball is going to go. I have different, if you recall, I used the Scene Master meadow grass, and I've just put that around in different areas. Like here's some of it, and there's some of it around the sign. So I just kind of spread that out a little bit. Around the farmhouse, I put in some darker green, which is more natural around the house itself, and then it kind of fades out more into the dirt or the lighter colors as you get further away from the farmhouse. Put in the fence. You can see I put in the fence all the way around because this fence is in this town called Willoughby. And then this is the area where the young man will be playing guitar to a small audience. So it's all coming together pretty well. Now, the next few things that I have to do, which will be in part 2 of the upcoming video, lighting, flowers, trees, bushes, water features, and then finally the figures themselves. That's all coming up in part 2 of this video. So stay tuned for that. I hope you've learned something from what I've done in part 1, and get ready for part 2. A lot of cool stuff coming up.